Previously on Reading Between the Lines with Tan the Man.
Welcome back to Reading Between the Lines with Tan the Man. Today I have with me Cortney Harding. It's great to have you with us, Cortney.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Cortney doesn't need an introduction. Her bio is enough for people to just Google her. However, Courtney, since we have you with us, would you be so gracious enough to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a very SEO friendly name. My parents were visionaries in that respect. My name is spelled in kind of an interesting way, and so I'm pretty easy to find on the internet, and I'll share everything at the end of the episode. But yeah, thank you so much again for having me. I'm Cortney Harding. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Friends with Holograms. We're a full service virtual and augmented reality agency. We work with Fortune 100s, we work with nonprofits, we work with major consultancies, and we help folks understand and build VR and metaverse technologies. So we've done everything from like full project builds to consulting work. And yeah, I also teach. I have taught at different universities, I've taught online, and I'm part of the World Economic Forum's metaverse committees. And yeah, that's kind of enough stuff to keep me busy.
Absolutely. So, Courtney, why don't you talk to us a little bit about your personal background? What led you to this position today where you're involved within the metaverse, the VR, even with World Economic Forum? Talk us through your personal childhood background, your professional and academic background. We'd love to know.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up on the West Coast. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. Came from a very kind of middle class family. My parents were educators, just kind of regular suburban childhood. And I was not really exposed to that much technology as a child. We had a computer that we had dial-up internet for. I'm totally giving away how old I am, but whatever. But it wasn't like a techie childhood. So, I was always interested in the arts, music, journalism, governance, politics, activism. So I did a lot of different things as a young person. I went to college at a school called Wellesley, which is right outside Boston. I was a political science major and I did college radio. I didn't study much technology there. I took a couple of computer science courses because I was curious, but they were not like I didn't take the advanced ones. I took like basic HTML. I finished college. I kind of goofed off for a year, answered phones at a law firm, went and saw bands every night, just really took a year to be kind of a slacker. And then after that year, it was like, okay, now I have to, bills coming due for my student loans. I have to actually do stuff and not waste this degree that I spent a lot of money on. So I got back into politics. I worked for a nonprofit. I came to New York in 2005 to go to graduate school at NYU. I have a master's in public policy from there that I've never used, but still I'm paying for because that's how it works. And while I was in New York as a graduate student, I was writing more about the arts and music for all these different publications here. And so actually, when I finished graduate school, I got a job at Billboard magazine, which is a music business publication. And I was a journalist there. I was a writer. I had a column. I became an editor there. So I was the music editor for a couple of years. And that was a really fun job. I had a tremendous amount of, opportunities, and I met really amazing people, and I wrote all these really fun stories. And then Spotify launched in the US in 2011, and I was fascinated by what was going to happen with that. And there was a really interesting ecosystem of companies built around Spotify, so other music technology companies. So I worked for several of those. I mostly did like business development, strategy. A lot of them were overseas companies, so I helped them launch in the US. And so I did that for a few years. It was a really interesting time. I wrote 2 books about music and technology. I had a podcast that I co-hosted with a dear friend of mine about it. I did a lot of panels and talks and really learned as much as I could about the space, which is something I really like to do. And then in 2015, I went to an art show in New York and I saw a VR piece. This was very early. This was the Oculus DK1. If I saw this piece now, I would probably be like, what is this? This isn't very good. But at the time, it was really groundbreaking. So something really sparked inside me. And I thought, gosh, I really want to do this. I'd been kind of looking for a next step. And I was like, this is it. So I spent a year learning as much as I could about the space and writing and kind of getting the lay of the land. And then in 2016, I did a panel at South by Southwest on music and VR. I was on a panel with this guy, Kevin, who was a VR director and just about to start an agency. He and I, had a nice conversation. We stayed in touch. We hit it off. I joined him to build his agency. I did that for about a year and a half. Learned a ton, worked with some really amazing clients. We worked with MTV, we worked with Ram Trucks, we worked with Discovery Channel. And then after about a year and a half of working 80-hour weeks for someone else, I thought, okay, I'd rather just do this for myself. And Kevin and I stayed on good terms and we've worked together since. And so I started Friends with Holograms, which is my company. And pretty much out of the gate, we had a couple of really interesting consulting gigs for large companies. And then we did a project for a big consultancy that did incredibly well. It won some awards. It really, jump-started what we did. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. And we've been building all sorts of amazing things. I can talk in more detail about those projects as we go through this, but working on really, really cool stuff that I'm so excited to work on every day. And then, I do a lot of teaching. I do some stuff with World Economic Forum. And that keeps me busy.
Absolutely. So Courtney, let me ask you this. Why don't you tell us what is Friends with Holograms and why did you start it?
Yeah, so Friends with Holograms is a full service VR, AR, and Metaverse agency. We have done projects from start to finish. So people will come to us with an idea or a question, and we will help them basically execute. So we'll do the script, we'll do the creative, our team will direct it, our team will do all the coding, and we'll actually help people launch these projects. We also do some more general consulting work. So if folks have their own internal production teams, we can collaborate with them. We've done some work in terms of helping clients understand the metaverse. That is becoming a larger part of our portfolio as we move forward. Primarily, we were focused on VR for training, and within that VR for training on sort of soft skills, right? So communication, empathy. A lot of our focus was around like social impact work, so racial bias, inclusion, all that stuff, mental health. And so we do that, and we still do that, and that's a big part of what we do. And also then we just do a lot of consulting on like, why should companies be in the metaverse? What should they be doing? A lot of companies are at the stage where they just hear the term, right? So an executive will say, oh, I read about this thing, the metaverse, in The Economist or in the Wall Street Journal. And then we get people who are like, oh, we need to do a metaverse thing. And I'm like, okay, let's back up 10 steps. Why, right? Because I think we're at such an early stage and everyone kind of wants to do this, but they really don't know what to do or even why they should do it. And so that for us is a really key question, is helping people understand, okay, well, why are you doing this? What do you aim to get out of this? What is your goal here, right? If your goal is just to build something and learn from it, cool. But I think people just sort of hear the term and they don't really understand like what it is beyond like a thing they should be doing. So that's a big part of what we do, is help people understand why they should be doing this, if they should be doing it, right? There's a lot of people who kind of don't even need to be building in the metaverse right now. And if it's something they choose to do, then what's the best way to do it?
So let me ask you this question. Why should someone consider having a metaverse strategy, and if they should be doing it in the first place then?
Well, everyone should think about if it's something they should do, right? Like that's a question you should ask, but it doesn't mean that you have to, that the answer to that question doesn't have to be yes, right? If your audience is primarily older or not very technical, you don't really need a metaverse strategy because that's not where they are, right? You want to be meeting your audience where they are. If your audience is on a different platform, like go meet them there. Don't do work you don't have to do, right? If your audience is younger and more digital, then yeah, that's a thing to consider. I think where people get hung up or they get lost is they think they can just build something and put it up and that's it, right? And really the metaverse, at the end of the day, the metaverse is people. I mean, I make that joke a lot, but it's true. The metaverse is just another community. It's just another social network in kind of a different form. So if you build a really nice metaverse world, and I've seen people do this, you build something really cool, really interesting, you put it up online, or you put it up on Horizon Worlds or in Spatial or Decentraland, or pick your platform, there's a lot of them, then you have to get people there and you have to keep them engaged, right? So if you look at platforms that have been successful, like Nike's Roblox world is incredible, and it gets talked about a lot because Nike does a good job. They keep people entertained, they keep them coming back, they resource it correctly, right? Versus others, and I won't name names because I would like them as clients one day, but I have seen other big companies, you build something really cool and you put out a press release and Ad Age covers it, and that's so exciting. And then you go back a week later and there's like 3 people in there. And it's like, well, what's the point, right? I mean, you built a thing, you got to put out a press release, ooh, we're cutting edge, you look at us. But it's like, you have to resource it, you have to build community. You can't just like stick something up and expect people to come. So, or to be engaged in a meaningful way beyond like coming in for 5 minutes. So I think that's where we really advise people, like, look, if you're going to do this, you should, but you should understand that this is something that has to be resourced correctly and maintained. And you can't just make an intern do it, right? This is something you have to look at, like your social media, right? Companies have social media agencies, they have social media teams, they build brand voices and communities, and they really work on that. And that can all translate into the metaverse. But I think people are very slow to understand that at this point.
Absolutely. And so Cortney, within your work with, okay, so Cortney, let me ask you this question. Within your work with the World Economic Forum, you're part of the Metaverse Council. What's all that about?
Yeah, so I'm on two World Economic Forum Metaverse Councils, one on governance and one on entertainment. And I've been part of that for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months now. And a lot of it is just, we have these monthly conference calls where we talk about the issues of the day, people present the work that they're doing, and then we have smaller discussion breakouts where we talk about specific topics, and all of that goes into white papers, which we then offer feedback on. So a lot of it is kind of building a perspective and a narrative and offering solutions and advice for like governments or big companies that are part of the forum that want to be part of this world. But again, there's not a lot of understanding of the space right now. So it's taking these people that are, have a deep understanding of the space and letting them come up with perspectives and suggestions to make the space better.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this question. As you're looking at the governance, what are some issues that you're seeing within governance, and what are some issues that you as the people within World Economic Forum are sort of addressing within the governance in Metaverse?
So I've been on the committee for a couple months, so I don't have a ton of insight into the second part of your question, but I can totally talk about the first part, which is at this point, the metaverse is the Wild West, right? That's a term that gets thrown around a lot because there's not a lot of regulations because it's so new. And I think the really critical thing is figuring out, like, we know what happens when the internet and social media are the Wild West and there's not a lot of restrictions or governance or anything like that. And that's the situation we have now, where I can't even go on Twitter because there's so much misinformation and harassment and toxicity. And, one thing that I am happy about in the sort of current state of affairs, where the metaverse is still so new, we have the opportunity to create something better. We've seen all the mistakes that happen with Web 2.0 and social media, right? We know what the challenges are. So then it becomes incumbent upon us to build something better because we have this knowledge. We have an understanding of like, okay, here's where things went wrong. How can we as a community build something better? And part of that is something that I work on where, like I'm doing a panel and an event at Davos in a couple of weeks on building a diverse and inclusive metaverse. I'm teaching a seminar, actually teaching 2 seminars about that coming up this year and probably some more, because it's really critical that as we build this sort of next iteration of the internet, which is the metaverse, we need all different stakeholders to be represented. It can't just be the group that built Web 2.0, which was generally men in Silicon Valley. And I don't believe any of them had ill intent, right? I think they all wanted to build interesting things, but they, like everyone, have their biases and their blinders. And the way to make the metaverse better is to make sure that everyone gets a voice, not just a certain number of people. So to go back to the governance issue, it's going to be really challenging because a lot of the things that happen in the metaverse will not be part of large communities. They will be part of like smaller micro worlds, right? And so how do we make sure that we're not creating these echo chambers? How do we make sure we're not allowing people to spread misinformation, to stir up hate, violence, all of these things? We've seen like WhatsApp communities go really badly, for example. There are WhatsApp communities where people are spreading rumors that lead to people being killed. That's terrifying. So how do we crack down on that? How do we crack down on communities where people are spreading hate and misinformation? So I think that's where we really need to focus. The challenge is, unfortunately, at least in the United States, and I'm guessing in a lot of other countries, leadership and people in charge of like governance tend to be older and not very tech savvy. And, there's all these famous clips of legislators in the United States of America, asking tech CEOs, like, how do I fix my iPhone? And it's just kind of sad. It's like, okay, this is not who we should be trusting to work on these issues. We need people who actually understand it. So helping people understand what these issues are and build out a framework so that, again, we're not having to go back and play catch up to shut down misinformation, to shut down harassment, to shut down hate. We can sort of do it proactively rather than reactively.
Absolutely. Let me touch upon a point that you sort of briefly talked about. You said that you want to make sure that the mistakes of Web 2 aren't carried on to Web 3, right?
Yeah.
We all know that big tech has used everyone's data to their advantage. They've sold that data and they've monetized that data for themselves. So do you think that, especially I'm asking this question from a World Economic Forum perspective, do you think there should be a policy level change, something like a GDPR, where everyone's data, they have the true ownership of their own data, even though they are interacting with private companies? It's the people themselves that own the private data. And if the company wants to buy or sell it off further, they need to then buy that data from the customer directly. Do you think that is something that should happen within Web3, that you own your data truly?
Yeah, my fear is that that will create sort of a bifurcated experience where people like myself who are middle class or more, right? I guess middle class can say, oh no, I want to keep my own data and hold it close. And people who are not middle class, who are struggling, working class, whatever term you want to use, will sell their data because they need the money. So you're essentially sort of creating this two-tiered system where the people who can afford it have the privacy, and the people who can't afford it will give up their privacy. So it's tricky. It's problematic. I mean, I would say definitely more restrictions on what data can be shared. Definitely allowing people to have a deeper understanding of how their data is being used. I'm always fascinated when I'm on social media because I feel like they have so much of my data, and yet every ad I see, I'm like, why am I seeing this? I mean, the cudgel level of a lot of the way that this data is used is absurd. So, I had a friend this year who got engaged to her partner. And within a minute of them getting engaged, right, she posted it on social media, and she had ads for weddings, right? And then she got married, she posted that on social media, ads for babies, on and on and on. And it's this like, it's not even like micro-targeted, it's this like blunt object. So, part of me is always sort of amused when people freak out about this, because I'm like, yeah, a lot of your data is not actually being used in a meaningful or interesting way. It's just sort of out there. And again, it's not targeted well. So definitely I think allowing people to understand where their data is going, what data is being used, what data is being shared and scraped, like that is very, very important. I'm always hesitant to create a system where people who can afford it will have a better experience than people who can't. But it's tricky. Like, I don't know that I have the perfect answer. I don't know that anyone does. That's why we need to spend all this time doing research and writing white papers and talking to stakeholders, and again, making sure that all voices are represented, because it's one thing for me to say like, oh yeah, as a middle-class American person, here's what would benefit me. But I want to make sure that I'm understanding voices from all over the world and all different parts of the economic spectrum to understand, okay, what's also going to benefit them, because they're probably going to be different answers.
But don't you think that would help income inequality? Because people within Asia or Africa are struggling due to income inequality. If you can then sell your data to receive monthly income, don't you think that's good for developing countries?
I guess it would depend on what you get out of it, right? Like, if you get money and more targeted ads, sure. I mean, it's something I struggle with, because like in the US, people can sell blood and plasma, right? Now, as a middle-class person with a job, I don't have to do that. But when I was broke in 23, I did, and it was terrible. It had a really deleterious effect on my health. And, there are people who are in a situation where like they can't survive unless they're selling their blood and plasma. And like, that's not a great state of affairs. I know in other places you can sell your organs for cash, and there's a lot of issues around consent. And even if you do consent to do that, right, and you get paid for it, that's still a pretty tricky state of affairs. And obviously selling your data is not like selling your kidney, right? I would never compare the two, but it really something. And again, this could just be my perspective as like a middle-class Western person, right? Where I get sort of like, ooh, a little freaked out about it, but most people would be like, yeah, sure, buy my data, great, I don't care, I'll feed my kids, cool, have some data. So I'd rather see it something to the effect of, if you choose to monetize, and also like, why would a company want to own the data of people who can't actually consume that much? Right? Like that's the other tricky challenge is, okay, you are owning the data so you can presumably serve ads to people. But if you are in a position where you can't buy anything or consume anything that's being advertised to you, it's kind of like, what's the point? And then you get into like, okay, we're training the data, and that is tricky. I mean, I think the lack of transparency is really what trips me up there. And so I think that if there was a lot of transparency and people could choose to opt in, opt out, like I would opt into data collection and take whatever would be paid to me and donate it to a charity. Like that, I think, get a little closer to. And I think the argument from tech companies a lot of the time as well, you are the product, right? You get this stuff for free. There was a Google product many, many years ago, pre-smartphone, called Google 411. And I remember this was like 20 years ago. And I remember calling it, and you could call this Google 411 and ask questions, what time is such and such open until, or, how do I get there? Because it was all pre-smartphone. And the service got shut down eventually. And I remember being kind of bummed about it. And then I remember reading about it. And it was not so that Google could actually help you, like, understand what time a restaurant closed. It was so they could have regionally appropriate pronunciations. So when they were giving you directions in Google Maps, they would pronounce the names of the streets as though you were local and not, like there's a street in New York, it's pronounced Houston, even though it's spelled like Houston. And, if you came from outside of New York, you would say Houston Street, and New Yorkers will laugh at you and say, no, it's Houston, right? And so if you're using like Google Maps or another navigation service, it'll say Houston, right? It'll give you that contextually correct pronunciation. And that's all based on this free service that Google offered, right? And this is really in the weeds, but I think it's interesting because it really does speak to the challenges of like, okay, you're getting something with technology. You are the product, but you're also using the product. So yeah, I mean, this is in the weeds, and we can move on. But yeah, I don't have an easy answer.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this question then. During 2020, Klaus Schwab, who's the founder of World Economic Forum, made a statement that you will own nothing and be happy. A lot of people were not really happy about that, but the people within Metaverse have started decoding that phrase. Was Klaus Schwab ahead of everyone? And did he predict the rise of Metaverse with that statement where it said you will own nothing and be happy?
No, that's kind of absurd, right? Like, I don't think that's because, like, at the end of the day, we have physical bodies. I mean, we can spend a lot of time in the metaverse, but at the end of the day, like, you need to live somewhere, you need to eat food, you can't survive without clothes. Now, believe me, I think there are things that should be nationalized. I think we can move away from ownership and into sort of community like that. That's all okay. But no, that's really, again, that's like privilege talking, right? So every time I meet people who are like, I'm in buy nothing communities and I don't believe in ownership and I'm just like, yeah, you're wealthy, like, cool, good for you. There's a band that I was a fan of in high school that said, they had a lyric that was like, people who think money is evil have never had a welfare Christmas. And so I think that's a statement of huge privilege. I think we can move towards like sharing economies, and we kind of already have, and definitely more sort of community care, and like that stuff is amazing. But again, if you are like the head of the World Economic Forum, that's a position that confers a ton of privilege. And so it's very easy to sort of say like, oh, let's own nothing and be as one. And it's like, yeah, if somebody actually tried to come take your apartment away, you would not be happy about it.
Absolutely. Do you think we would see the Davos happening within the metaverse in a few years?
That's a really interesting question. Perhaps, like, I definitely am interested in metaverse powered experiences for, folks who otherwise couldn't be part of places because they can't travel because of financial reasons, if there's another pandemic. And I do like the idea of making those spaces more open. I think there will be pushback because what those spaces thrive on is exclusivity at the end of the day, right? We've seen Ivy League schools in the US, and I'm sure, these fancy schools all over the world have said, oh, we'll do some online education, we'll do this, we'll do that. But like nobody takes you seriously if you just did Harvard on the internet, right? People take you seriously if you did Harvard in real life because you had to get into Harvard, right? Nobody's going to take a Davos that anyone can come to seriously because at the end of the day, Davos is about exclusivity, right? Ivy League schools are about exclusivity. They could be bigger. They choose not to be because that's kind of the whole point of it. That said, like I do like the idea of events in the metaverse. I've been part of many of them. I find them very interesting. I think the challenge with that, honestly, is it's the lack of serendipity. Because definitely online and even in the metaverse, right, you don't run into people. I've done so many Zoom events, I've done so many of them, and they're so terrible. And I hate doing Zoom conferences, and I never want to do them again because you're just talking to a screen and then you hang up and that's it, right? They're easy because like I can do a keynote wearing sweatpants, which I enjoy very much, because I'm lazy and I don't like getting dressed up. But the flip side is all the connections I've made at events are because I sat next to somebody on a bus, or I was next to somebody in line at dinner, or I ran into somebody that I knew 10 years ago and we reconnected, right? That type of serendipity is impossible to create online and very hard to create in the metaverse. That doesn't mean we can't, but I think that is much further down the road. And the thing with the online stuff is you just close your computer and you're done with it. The things with the metaverse stuff is you take the headset off and you're kind of done with it. So you're not as immersed in that respect. That said, I'm all for more metaverse events. I do like interacting with people in the metaverse much more than I like interacting with people online. But like the metaverse is never going to replace in person. And I see people freak out about, oh my God, metaverse and headset all day long. I'm like, yeah, we're not going to be. We're not. It's additive. It's not, I'm the biggest proponent of this stuff on earth, and I didn't put on my headset for a week over the holiday break. I went for hikes. I walked my dog. I went to art museums. Like these are all things that the metaverse cannot really replace, nor should it. But then I did, now that I'm back at work, I did interesting metaverse stuff. And so it's not like the idea that we're just going to be in the metaverse all day long is absurd. We're not on our computers all day long. We're probably on them more than we should be. But we leave our homes.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the final section of the interview, which is rapid fire questions. This is my favorite section because I love to ask you thought-provoking questions. So let me start off with this question. What, according to you, is going to trigger the mass adoption of Metaverse and Web3?
Better headsets. I would say better headsets, which are coming relatively soon. So that would be cheaper, faster, and lighter, which are all on the horizon. I would say more companies in the space. So the more folks are building for this, the better. I would say more content and more experiences, because right now we still have very small content libraries. There's always that sort of triggering moment, right? There was always the moment where everyone all of a sudden had a smartphone. Everyone all of a sudden had a laptop. Everyone all of a sudden had this. And it was because it became harder to live your life without one than with one, right? And so we're going to hit that point in the metaverse, and I'd say the relatively near future, where it becomes harder to not be in the metaverse than to be in the metaverse.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this question then. A lot of us that work on computers have issues with our eyesights because of looking at computer screens for 8 hours, 10 hours at a stretch. From that understanding, do you think VR headsets are ever going to take off? Because if tomorrow I have to tell someone that, okay, you work within the metaverse and you spend 8 hours working within the metaverse, you're probably a receptionist in Decentraland or Upland or Sandbox within an experience, and you have to sit there wearing a headset for 8 hours. Do you think that is ever going to take off?
Yeah, because the headsets will get better. Like they'll get lighter and faster. I mean, it's the same. Like we're all on our laptops all day long because they are easy to use at this point, right? It's the same with our smartphones. Like we've got, this thing is kind of fused to my hand because it's easy to use. So I think the problem with, let me find it. Sorry, so this is the Quest Pro, which is the newest Meta headset that came out a couple months ago. Like I can wear this thing pretty much most of the day. Like I've been in this thing for hours at a time, right? And it's fine. Like I have to take it off eventually. I have to take it off periodically, but I have to not be on my computer periodically because I have to, eat and walk the dog and use the bathroom and take a shower. So yeah, we're never going to be so fused to our technologies that we can't like remove them and take breaks, and we should. But yeah, I mean, I think like this type of a headset, which will get even lighter and better and faster in the next couple of years, will be to the point where people can wear it for long stretches very comfortably.
Is the future VR headsets or AR headsets?
The future is a mix. So the Quest Pro is both. So you can switch between VR and AR. You can be in AR mode, you can be in VR mode, you can go back and forth very easily. So yeah, it's that. It's, the fully closed off headsets, I think we've hit a ceiling with those because people want to be able to switch back and forth. The AR headsets or the AR glasses might have more sort of consumer adoption more quickly because those, at the end of the day, there's more experiences for them and they are more useful. But I think a mixed reality headset is where we're going to wind up.
Absolutely. Per your experience, who's going to lead the metaverse arms race? Is it going to be big tech or companies like Upland, Sandbox, Decentraland?
Well, it sort of depends because it's like on the hardware side of things, because hardware is so expensive to create. I think big companies are going to lead on hardware because like they have the resources to do all the R&D. I think on the social side, we're going to see a mix. So, I don't think there's going to be like one metaverse world. That's crazy. There's no one internet, right? I have my browser open behind me as I'm talking to you, and I have like my Twitter tab, my Facebook tab, my LinkedIn tab, my Instagram tab, my email tab. Like we're going to have essentially like a tabbed universe where there will be different worlds, and some of them might be like owned by big companies, some of them might be startups, some of them might be startups that get bought by big companies, and people will be able to seamlessly switch back and forth. And so, you'll have different personas in each, just like you have on the internet. So what I post on LinkedIn is not what I post on Instagram. It's not what I post on Twitter. I have sort of separate images and personas for each of those. And so what I do in Decentraland might be very different than what I do in like Horizon Workrooms or Spatial, because I'm doing different things, and that's normal and fine, and people code switch constantly, and that's nothing new. And so yeah, I mean, we could see like a Decentraland get very popular, and then you are in that for your hanging out with your friends, and then you go to Horizon Workrooms for your job, and people move back and forth.
What brings e-commerce to metaverse?
Oh, we're already seeing it, but it's really boring right now. I mean, it's like so many clothing brands just are so unimaginative. They're like, we built a store in the metaverse. You can buy our clothes in the metaverse. And I was like, okay, why? For what purpose? I mean, we're already seeing people like buying NFTs and buying, digital goods. I could see a world where you buy a digital good and you get a physical version of it and vice versa. So I like that. I mean, we already have like e-commerce in the metaverse. It's just really nascent. And again, like you can buy a digital outfit for your avatar, which cool, fun. I'm into that. You're never going to be able to like buy coffee in the metaverse because why would you? Can't actually drink it.
Let me ask you this question. Is GDPR a threat to metaverse?
No, although it's really annoying. Like every time I'm in Europe, like I travel in Europe at least once a year, if not more. And oh my God, like, can I just have one universal like click to accept everything button and then just use the internet like a normal person as opposed to like click, 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 click? Like it's driving me nuts. No, I think that like it needs to be designed better, or it needs to be implemented better in different worlds. But I don't think that it's going to threaten the metaverse in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. Since you are from US, let me ask you this question. Within 2016, former President Donald Trump used Facebook's advantage using Cambridge Analytica to gain a competitive advantage within elections. We all know that he's running for elections again. He's made that announcement. He has a team that is quite tech savvy. Do you think the next election campaign for 2024 presidential election is going to be run within the metaverse? Do you think there's going to be a lot of campaigning that's going to happen within the metaverse?
Oh my gosh, just the thought of that is really amusing to me, because I think yes, and I think it's gonna in 10 years be really cringy to look at, right? So I can definitely see young people being reached in the metaverse, right? Like that's where young people are right now. They're in Roblox, they're in Fortnite. You know, a woman who's in Congress from New York did something where she did Animal Crossing, and like she had a whole campaign rally in Animal Crossing, which was fun, and it actually was great for her because she's young and she's, you know, that was her audience, and it was actually pretty cool to see her doing that. The thought of like a Biden avatar in the metaverse is just kind of amusing to me. I don't think it's bad or good. I think it's going to be one of those things that doesn't age well. Yeah, I could see more politicians getting into the metaverse and doing, you know, metaverse town halls, and that's fine. The Trump thing, to sort of touch on that, because I was here for all of that and it was unpleasant. That was partially social media, but a lot of that would have happened without social media, right? Like that was just the state of the country and the time, and a lot of other things. And again, that goes back to what I was talking about earlier, the idea that we need to make sure that we don't let misinformation circulate in the metaverse, because that is a huge concern when you have these communities that are sort of small and locked and fringe, to make sure that, you know, yes, freedom of speech, yes, freedom of expression. We don't want something where people can't express themselves freely, but there are limits. You can't encourage violence. You know, we want to make sure that people are not spreading disinformation and misinformation. So I think that's really the next big step for the metaverse, is making sure, like, how do we make this a safe space for free expression, but also make sure that there are controls.
Absolutely. We all know that holographic projections have always been touted within science fiction movies as the future. How far do you think we are from holographic projections?
I mean, they exist right now. Like, you can get volumetrically captured, you can become a hologram. I mean, that goes back to, you know, depending on how you define it, that goes back to like 10 years ago at Coachella, where you had the Biggie and Tupac rapping as holograms. The interesting thing for me, so Friends with Holograms, the name of the company, comes out of an interview I did for the New York Times like several years ago now, and really sort of spinning out like what happens when all these technologies converge. And so what happens when you can have essentially parasocial relationships with real people? So if you think of like a person can be captured as a hologram, that exists, that's easy enough to do. And then there is so much data about all of us, right? Especially if you're famous, you know, your voice has been captured millions of times, your image has been captured millions of times. There's a library of content of yours. It would be not easy at this point for an AI to kind of replicate that, but I see a world where you could like get home from school and call up your favorite musician. They are an avatar and you can actually talk to them, and it's not scripted. It's not, you know, a chatbot of them. It's just, you know, it's like you feel like you have a relationship with them. And then what does that mean for like fandom and intimacy? And one thing that concerns me as a person who consumes media and sees all this is, and this is external to the metaverse, but I think it's important to talk about, is the amount of like parasocial relationships people have to the amount of actually social relationships that people have. So, you know, I know people who feel intimately connected to like TV characters and TV shows, right? And it's fine to watch television, enjoy it, have fun, talk about it. Like that's great. I'm not a big TV person, but I'm not opposed to it. It's another thing when that kind of becomes your life and you do it to the exclusion of actual relationships with actual people. And I think one of the most deleterious effects of COVID that we haven't talked about is people became so isolated, and because they couldn't interact with actual people, they wound up developing these really tight, intense relationships with like fictional characters or reality television stars. And that gets tricky because there are people who will say, oh, I can't go out with you tonight, I have to watch this TV show. And it's like, maybe just listen to yourself for a second, right? And like, again, the metaverse is amazing. Obviously, I've just spent the last 90 minutes talking to you about it. It's what I do all day long. I love it, I believe in it. It does not, nor should it, replicate human interaction, right? And so I think that what it can do is, at its best, it's additive. It allows you to interact with people that you can't interact with physically, people in different countries, people who don't live in the same city as you, people who have the same interests as you but live in a different place. For people with health issues or disabilities, it can be really transformative. But it can't nor should it replace actual human interaction. And that's my greatest fear, is because right now, a lot of people, especially in the US, are still so crazed because of COVID, right? There's like a meme culture in the US that I see a lot, especially among young women, where it's just like, cancel your plans, flake on everyone, stay at home and watch a movie. And it's like, no, go live your life, be a person. Don't hide behind this, like, oh, I'm an introvert. It's like, no, at a certain point, like, you're gonna cut everyone off out of your life and you're gonna be miserable. And I think that's the danger that I see. And that's one thing that I am worried about with the metaverse, is that it will allow already isolated people to become further isolated. And when people are isolated, nothing good happens.
Absolutely. That is one of the toxicity of Web2 is extreme polarization, right? However, I know we're short on time and you have another engagement, but let me ask you the one last question before I let you go. As US is one of the recipients of a lot of immigration, right? We hear this point from people who oppose immigration, that the reason I am not a proponent of immigration is because new immigrants don't assimilate in the culture, right? This is one of the arguments that a lot of people who are anti-immigration say. So
yeah,
let me ask you this question. Do you think metaverse and sort of simulated worlds can sort of help assimilate new immigrants within host societies? US is obviously a destination where a lot of people want to go, and new immigrants try to go. Europe is another destination. There's many other destinations, but do you think metaverse as a technology can help the host countries and the new immigrants that want to immigrate to those countries sort of integrate within the culture, understand each other's culture, the norms, the etiquettes, and things like that? Do you think that is something that not only on a personal level, but on a policy level, that governments should sort of look at?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, like, living in New York City, I have a slightly different perspective, because New York City, you don't have to assimilate as much. Like, New York City is amazing because there are really robust networks here. Obviously, it makes your life a lot easier if you speak some English, right? And you have some understanding of broadly American norms. But generally, you can come to New York City and kind of find your people and figure it out, and it's not as bad as it is a lot of places, right? I think the assimilation thing broadly in the US is really just kind of racist. It's not actually a concern about, like, okay, well, it helps people to speak English so they can navigate the subway. It's just racism, basically, in the US. But your larger point, I think, is really interesting. And I think that certainly, like, learning language in the metaverse is fantastic, allowing people to connect via platforms in the metaverse to learn about different cultures, to sort of understand, like, yeah, there are certain cultural norms in the US that you don't have in other countries. To help people understand that is fantastic. And the language stuff is definitely fantastic. So yeah, I mean, I think also, when you look at communities that are isolated or communities that are niche, communities that are under, threat from different sort of legislators, like allowing people to connect in the metaverse, even though they can't connect in the real world, is really important, right? So I don't want to diminish the importance of allowing people from marginalized communities to connect with one another in the metaverse. I don't want it to become the only place we connect, right? Like it's one of many places to connect. It's a really wonderful place to connect. I also just want to make sure that we're not giving up other forms of connection to just be in the metaverse.
Absolutely. Well, I would have loved to have you here for another 2 hours, Courtney, but we know that you have another engagement. We'll probably bring you back for another episode later on,
Yeah.
probably in season 3. But it's been a pleasure having you here. Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up this interview?
No, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me. I would love to come back and chat more. This has been great. If you are listening and you've made it this far, congratulations. If you want to find me online, I'm happy to chat with folks. All my social media handle is just my name. So Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, it's just Cortney Harding, and that's Cortney with no U, Harding. Friends with Holograms, my company is friendswithholograms.com. Our Twitter is hologram friend. I couldn't get friends with holograms on Twitter for some reason. But definitely look us up, look me up, add me on whatever social platform you like. Also, I am in the metaverse. You can look me up I'm primarily on Spatial. I have a world in Spatial that I am building out. I'm going to start doing events there. So Spatial, love Spatial, Horizon World, I'm in there. So yeah, find me on the internet in the metaverse. And if you're in New York, if you're in Brooklyn, you can find me in real life.
Absolutely. And just as an addition, I'm going to put all of that within the description for this video. With that, Courtney, it's a pleasure having you here. This is Reading Between the Lines with Tandaman. Before I end this interview, I'm just going to say one thing that I always say: you be the arbiter of truth, the viewers of the Metaverse Street Journal. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Courtney. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Coming up on the next episode of Reading Between the Lines with Tandaman.